So this is the video image quality comparison that we do, where I do the hardest thing humanly possible, which is to play pool on camera and sober. Right away, I want to talk about the usability features. You won't see a big difference in image quality at low ISOs, but our GH5 and Sony a7R II here have electronic viewfinders, which make it much easier to record video when you're out in sun or maybe in a really dark environment where you don't want to light up the whole room. On the Nikon, when you're recording video, the viewfinder is just black. The two mirrorless cameras here also have sensor stabilization, which means you can use handheld video with, say, a fast prime lens in low light conditions and not have it be super, super shaky. They also have V-Log and S-Log. Logs can just help capture more and more dynamic range. And then the GH5 itself has a bunch of video features which the Sony and the Nikon don't have. For example, it can record more than 30 minutes. It has a screen that flips forward, which is useful when you're filming yourself or you want to show the person you're filming what the composition is like. It supports waveforms and vectors and all these different features that, as a filmmaker, you start to appreciate over time, but on a day-to-day basis, you might not really need it. So as far as features go on a video camera, the D850 is clearly the loser, but the thing about the D850 is it doesn't have to be the best video camera in the world, because I think people are going to want it as the best hybrid camera, because a lot of us shoot stills and then we shoot video. And it's got 45 megapixel stills and 9 frames per second and this absolutely stunning phase detect focusing system for stills. And it also shoots great video. And for the last several days that I've been shooting with it, the D850 has been good enough for the stuff I do. Yeah, I have to use VR lenses, the lenses with image stabilization, and I don't get to use any sort of log format. And yeah, I wish I had an EVF, but the back screen actually looks really sharp and is pretty bright, and it is tilting, which puts it at a big advantage over the D810, for example. And in those ways, the D850 is the first Nikon that I've been willing to use as a video camera. Also say the autofocusing with live view is better than either the a7R II or the GH5. And that's something, because especially the a7R II has pretty good autofocusing. It's hard to talk and shoot. So of course, as a YouTuber and photographer, I really care about one camera that can do everything. The last time we were in California on shooting Wanderlust, I ended up taking so many still images with my Panasonic GH5 because I was shooting both stills and video and I wanted to use the Panasonic for video. But that meant it's not a great stills camera, so that meant my stills weren't as good as they could have been if I'd had the D850. But now that the D850 exists, I would definitely use that for times when I need one camera that does both, because it's actually a great video camera. Here we are at ISO 25600, which is about as high as we'd practically go. The GH5 here has to be pushed to stop in post. And you can definitely see the advantage of full frame here, but I do want to point out that on the GH5, what we normally do is use the Sigma 18-35 f1.8, and we put a Metabone speed booster on there, and that lets us shoot at f1.1 with a nice sharp zoom lens, and that can allow it to produce even cleaner results in low light than with those other cameras. Problem with that system is that when I used a different f-stop on the GH5, everybody complained and got all super mad, so I'm not even going to do that again. All of these cameras also offer a feature we simply can't live without now, which is recording 4K with an extra crop. And it's so useful because sometimes you'll have, I don't know, a 100mm lens and you want to actually be at like 130 or 150. You can crop in with these and still get 4K quality. So it's like you have two lenses in one. So now we're going to repeat this test, because sometimes when you crop it, the image quality gets worse because the sensor size is smaller. But sometimes, like with the a7R here, it actually gets better because it's recording every single pixel instead of skipping some pixels. This is ISO 1600 with the crop. Let me answer frequently asked question. Why aren't we comparing it to the 5D Mark IV? Well, for one, we don't have the 5D Mark IV, and everybody seems to think I'm some kind of genie who snaps his fingers and gets any kind of camera gear he wants, but that's not the case. I don't own everything. Buying stuff is a pain, so we're not including the 5D Mark IV. But we have reviewed it in the past, and we compared it to the D810. The image quality on the 5D Mark IV is not as good as the D810. Therefore, through the transitive property, I know the D850 is better than the D810, therefore the D850 is also better than the 5D Mark IV from Canon for still image quality. For video, Canon heavily marketed 4K on the 5D Mark IV, and we found it absolutely unusable. As people who have been recording 4K video since 2014 on a multiple times per week, this is something that's part of our normal workflow. The 5D Mark IV is unusable for 4K video because of the severe crop factor and the terrible, terrible motion JPEG codec that they have on it. So as far as a video camera, I don't consider it a contender at all, especially considering it completely lacks any sort of tilt screen, which would make it that much more useful. Why don't we have the Sony a7S Mark II in here? Well, again, we just don't own it, but also it's not a great stills camera, and these are kind of cameras that you could use for stills or video pretty competently. The a7S II lacks this sort of whole 1.5x, 1.5 times crop that we find so useful and are now demonstrating, but also it's only 12 megapixels, so to compare that against a 45 megapixel camera seems a little bit silly. Also, it only has contrast detect focusing, which means the focusing for stills or video is kind of a pain. So for that reason, we didn't really consider it to be similar enough to bother including it. Now, if you want to see something really funny, go back and watch our Nikon D5 review, where we made our poor cameraman Justin record video with the Nikon D5 and then recorded his honest thoughts about it, and he hated it. And in fact, we've hated video on every Nikon we've ever used. The focusing was always bad, the quality was generally bad, they were really limited and just kind of clumsy. But the D850 is an awesome video camera. And no, the image quality isn't going to blow away the competition, but to me, it's overall a little bit better than that a7R II. And the focusing is a little bit better than the a7R II. It does have dual card slots in the D850, but it only records video to one of the two, so again, that's another advantage for the GH5. So if I'm just recording video and I'm not planning on taking stills, I'd still pick up my GH5 despite the smaller sensor, because we can use that speed booster and the faster lenses to compensate for that. But for when I need to shoot stills and video, or I want to be prepared for anything, I'm picking up the Nikon. And if I were a wedding shooter, forced to shoot some wedding video and a bunch of stills, again, the Nikon, because it's got those dual card slots that any pro would need for the stills at least. Anyway, congrats Nikon, I think this is a huge win. I'm really excited about shooting film and video stills with the D850. Oh, by the way, Justin just told me that there's some interesting banding here, and that's kind of what this process is. It's also for us to discover when we can and can't use a particular camera, so it could be that high ISO banding is a serious problem with the Nikon. Unfortunately, the D850 isn't the best camera for shooting action because it does show severe rolling shutter. Thanks for watching this. Subscribe to see more reviews of the Nikon. We have a whole trip planned out where we're going to really push it to its limit, so all that should be coming soon. And give us a like, and if you have follow-up questions, things you want to see covered in other reviews, ask a comment down below. Bye.